Hey there, everybody. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from this kind of strange virtual world where we started running little intros to these sessions to let everybody have a chance to sit down and enjoy themselves. And you can probably see popping up on your screen right now is Amy Eisenstein, who's our guest today. Before we begin, of course, I want to welcome you to the Philanthropy Mastermind series. We have about 120 programs coming to you this year, all focused around the issues that I hope are of greatest interest to you. And if you have ideas for things you'd like to see and hear about and guests you'd like to see present, I hope you'll let us know about that. We'll make sure to have contact information at the close of the presentation today. What I want to do, though, for just a moment is make sure that you know that you can interact with us throughout today by using either the chat at the bottom of your screen, and some of you have already found that little box. I hope you'll go ahead and say hello so that our presenter knows that you're here and has a chance to say a shout out and hello to you. So please do utilize the chat for that. And the Q&A, which is a perfect place to post your questions throughout the presentation today. Of course, you know what the presentation is all about, and that's why you're here. Well, first of all, you're here for Amy Eisenstein. You know her work, I'm sure, already. She's the author of several books, including Major Gift Fundraising for Small Shops, Raising More with Less, and 50 Asks in 50 Weeks, my favorite name for a book in this field. She is, of course, an ACFRE. There aren't many of those, which means that she's one of the top people in the field as recognized by AFP, our association. And she's the CEO of Capital Campaign Pro, a newly rebranded firm, but that doesn't mean that this is new to her or she is new to us. She's been advising people on capital campaigns, directing us, guiding us, and educating us on those campaigns and their work for a long time. Let's put it that way. And today's presentation, the 6 things you should do to get your board ready for a capital campaign, is a sweet spot for her and a really important place for all of us. So with that, I want to turn the baton over to Amy. Thank you so much for hanging out here, Amy. We really appreciate you.
Hi, Jay. Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm really thrilled to see people putting in their hellos from wherever they are in the country and in the world. I'm sitting here in my kitchen in New Jersey, and I would love to see more hellos from around the country and around the world. And also let us know what organization you're with. It's fun to see that too, to see the wide range of organizations that people are representing. So let's go ahead. We're going to dive right in. But as Jay mentioned, I am really happy to have this be more of a dialogue than a monologue. So I am going to keep one half eye on the Q&A box and another half eye on the chat. So I do want you to feel free to put in questions if I use jargon, if there's something that I say that you don't understand or needs clarification, please do go ahead and stick it mostly in the Q&A. Sometimes the chat box goes by really quickly. So if you have something that you want me to see, put it in the Q&A box. All right, so we're going to talk about 6 things you need to know, really a board member's guide to capital campaigns. So here's what we're going to cover in the next little less than an hour. We're going to do a quick campaign 101. Depending on where you are in your campaign, you may know more or less, but your board members probably need 101. You know what? In the chat, why don't you let us know if you're a board member or if you're on staff? I'd love to know how many board members are here listening in. So we're going to go through campaign 101, timelines and phases. We're going to go through where the money will come from. Every board member wants to know that. We're going to talk about the importance of feasibility studies, really key, and board members' FAQs. We're going to answer some of those, board roles in a campaign, and how to set a board goal. So thank you for sharing. I was keeping an eye on those board members. There's a lot of you here, so kudos to your lucky organizations to have you participating in something like this. All right, so a quick campaign 101. If you're headed into a capital campaign, whether you have board members who have been through campaigns or not, probably you have a combination, but the vast majority of your board members have not been through campaigns or multiple campaigns from start to finish. They need to understand what to expect and what is coming to them. And really, a quick 101 is so, so important. So we're going to go through the phases really quick so that you have a good understanding, so that you can help explain it to other board members if you're a board member, or your board members if you are on staff. All right, so I just first want to point out that some of these have really long timelines, right? Phase 1 here, pre-campaign planning, 3 to 12 months. So of course it depends on when you start counting. And it also depends on how ready you are. But in phase 1, pre-campaign, you're going to put together your project plans and your campaign objectives. What are you raising money for? You are going to come up with a working goal. And the working goal needs to be based on what the project plans cost and your campaign objectives are. So your goal, your initial goal, your working goal or a draft goal is not, a lot of times organizations will call me and say, Amy, we're having our 50th anniversary, so we want to raise $50 million. Okay, that's nice, but that doesn't have anything to do with what you're going to accomplish. And so it's not a good goal. It's, anniversaries are great, but they look back at what you've accomplished, and campaigns are forward-looking, they're future-based. And so we need our working goal tied to our campaign objectives and our project plans. Next, we're going to do our first initial draft case for support, gift range chart, which we're going to get into a teeny bit, and a depth chart, which are the donors connected to the potential gifts we hope to raise. Phase 2, a feasibility study. We're going to get into a little bit of detail for feasibility study. That's the second phase of a campaign where you test your plan that you made in pre-campaign planning with your lead donors. You discuss that initial draft case for support and get feedback, and you assess the giving potential of your community. In phase 3, you adjust your plans, your initial plans based on what you heard in the feasibility study. You revise your working goal, your draft goal, up or down based on what you heard in the feasibility study. And sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down, sometimes you're pretty close to on target. You finalize your case for support, again, based on the feedback you heard, and you develop a campaign plan. All right, in the quiet phase, this is where you start really raising money. You solicit your leadership level gifts, your board members, and your campaign volunteers. So this can take anywhere from 6 to 24 months. Generally, I find that it takes about 18 months. If you have a very well-established major gift program and you know your donors well, you might do it more quickly. If you have more relationship building to do, it's going to take longer. This is really important for your board members to know, because sometimes, board members are like, why can't we just do this in the next 6 months? Or why can't we do this in the next year? It's a good question. And if you can raise a certain amount of money in a year or 6 months, maybe you should have reached higher. So, all right. Campaign kickoff. You don't kick off the public phase of your campaign until you've raised about 75%, sometimes more, 80, 85, 90% of your goal. So we want to raise the vast majority of this, the campaign money in the quiet phase. And so we're not going to do any press releases. We're not going to have any campaign brochures until we've raised 75% or more of the goal and we're ready to go public. So here's when we announce our goal, our official goal. And honestly, this is an opportunity to raise or lower the goal, depending on how you did in the quiet phase. Sometimes organizations get to their goal during the quiet phase and they have an opportunity to raise the goal and raise much more. Other times the quiet phase can be disappointing. Sometimes those big gifts just don't come in like you hoped they would. And it's an opportunity here before you go public to scale back the project and scale back your goal. And then you go into, and you have events before going into the public phase, sort of to announce the public phase, to kick off the public phase, where you solicit your base for support, re-solicit the uncommitted, those you asked in the quiet phase but didn't commit yet, and close the gap to your goal. And finally, in the last phase, we're going to celebrate, express gratitude, send pledge reminders, all that good, exciting stuff. So I'm going to look in my questions box here. Leslie wants to know who runs the campaign. Well, staff and board do, generally with the support of a campaign consultant, outside expertise. So usually, it depends on the organization. But usually the ringleader is the executive director or CEO, supported by the development director, and supported by the board. All right. All right, let's get into our second topic for the day and figure out where the money is going to come from, because honestly, that is a huge question from board members. So we want to make sure that we have a good sense of where the money is going to come from. So it may or may not surprise you to find out that 50% or more of your money in almost any campaign, whether it's $1 million or $10 million or $100 million or more, is going to come from your top 20 donors. Give or take a few, but basically that is the case. And I'm going to show you how here. So here's a gift range chart. I just did it for $1 million to keep things simple. And your board members should see something like this. This is something you're going to make in pre-campaign planning before you do a feasibility study. So take your campaign objectives and your project plans and attach dollar goals to them, price tags to them, to come up with your initial working goal. And you're going to make a gift range chart. And there is a method to the madness, and there is a right and a wrong way to do a gift range chart. So if you're unfamiliar, this is a great opportunity to reach out and get some campaign expertise and outside counsel. So here are those first 20 gifts, those lead gifts I was talking about that you're going to solicit in the quiet phase of your campaign. In my example here, the first 20 gifts get you all the way to 70% of your goal. And these gifts come from 50 prospective donors. So you start with a list of 50 prospective donors. Those are actually the people that you want to talk to in your feasibility study who have the potential and might realistically give you those top 20 gifts in order to get to your campaign goal. So who might those be, right? We got to figure out who those people are. So they are people who have the ability to give, believe in your mission, and they have contact with your organization. We call this the ABCs of donor identification. And this is how you qualify donors. If you've been in fundraising for a while, you probably have heard the concept of donor qualification, right? Let's figure out how we can qualify our donors. They have to, we believe, have the ability, the financial ability to give the kind of gift we're looking for. So how do you figure that kind of thing out? Well, of course, DonorSearch, a wealth screening tool like DonorSearch, helps you with something like that. You also look at what kind of gift history do they have with your organization and with other organizations in the community. What do you know about what they and their spouse perhaps do for a living? What kind of lifestyle do they have? What do you know about them? But really looking at how generous they are in your community. Are their names on donor walls in the local hospital or the community theater or the library, right? How generous are they with other organizations and yours, to get a sense of that? And do they believe in the mission and have contact with the organization? Hold on, let me go. Okay, I jumped the gun, but these can be individuals, foundations, and corporations, right? Not just individuals, but foundations and corporations too, that you have relationships with in your community. Primarily, it's people who are already giving to you. One of the questions we get asked probably a lot as campaign consultants is, can you help us find donors? They must be out there. but really the first place is to look in here. Look in your community, look in your donor database, look at your community of volunteers. There are people who are already giving to you. Major donors in your community. So there are some philanthropists who are probably in your community who may be already aware of your organization that would get involved to help you make this big leap in programs and services, but maybe aren't donors currently. Those are a few, and current and former board members. So let me just go back up here for belief in your mission for a minute, right? So we want to start with people who already give to you, who already volunteer, who already raise their hand and say, this is important to me. That's what we mean by belief in mission. Now you can deepen those relationships by engaging donors in volunteer activities and campaign committees and all sorts of other things. But they've got to have a fundamental belief in what you do. And contact with your organization. What I mean by that is they'll get back to you. Maybe not right away. It may take 2 or 3 phone calls or 2 or 3 emails. But, if I'm going to email Oprah Winfrey, she is never going to email me back or call me back, right? I don't have contact with her. She even, though she has the ability to give, she doesn't believe in our mission, whatever that might be. And she doesn't have contact with our organization or me. So she's not a good prospect for this campaign. You know what I mean? But your board members need to know that, because I can't tell you how many board meetings and boardrooms I've been in where people say, what about Bill Gates, right? And my immediate response is, that's a super interesting idea. Do you know Bill Gates? And, the answer 99% of the time is no, of course I don't know Bill Gates. Well, then why is he a good prospect for this organization? So some board members going to think that way. And I just want to make sure that you have the language, the tools, the resources necessary to say, look, we need to qualify our prospects with the ABCs of giving, right? They have to have the ability to give. That is true, right? They have to believe in our mission. They have to be connected to our organization or our community in some way. And they have to have contact with someone at our organization. Eventually, they need to call us back. It may not be the first time or the second time, but we need to have their address, their email address, their phone number. We need to have reason to believe that they will respond. All right. Whew. Okay. I have been rambling for a while. So if you have questions, if you have concerns, if you have thoughts, do go ahead and feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A box. I am happy to answer them. So we've covered campaign 101, timelines and phases. Really, unless your board member, a board member, has experience on multiple campaigns, and a few do, the vast majority of your board members must understand how campaigns work, how they're laid out, what the timeline looks like, and to really understand where the money will come from. It's not going to come from an unknown donor that's sort of out there. All right, let's talk about feasibility studies. And then Drew, I see your question and I will answer it. So thank you. All right, feasibility studies. This is my capital campaign formula. Well, not just mine, the capital campaign formula, right? 20 gifts, I showed you this on the gift range chart, gets you to 70% of your goal with 50 prospective donors. Now, in order to run a successful capital campaign and be confident that you can do so and have your board members vote to proceed, because they're going to be nervous, right? Especially if they don't have tons of experience with capital campaigns and they don't know where the money is coming from. This process, the feasibility study, which, let's face it, should have probably been named a campaign readiness study. It shouldn't have been named a feasibility study, because too many of your board members think, It's testing to see whether or not our project is feasible or whether the campaign is feasible. That's not usually the question. The usual question, or what it really studies and tests, is how should we do this? Not is it possible, but how is it possible and how do we proceed? So I'm going to rename them campaign readiness planning studies. But it is an opportunity to talk to your leadership level donors. These people who are going to give the 20 top gifts to get you to 70% of the goal, you want to talk to them early in your campaign, engage them, get their feedback. And when they give you the thumbs up, then your board can say, yes, we can do a campaign, and here are the recommendations on how to proceed. And our biggest potential donors are on board and excited and with us, and we can proceed with confidence. So that's what a feasibility study is and does, and why it's so important to success, because it is engaging these 50 prospective donors who have the ability to make these biggest gifts to your campaign way before you ask them for a gift. All right, let me go to Drew's question now. So Drew's saying, we had a feasibility study done more than 2 years ago. Does it need to be done again? Drew, yes, it does. We are in a totally different place and time, economically, pandemic-wise, all sorts of things. I'm guessing that you decided not to proceed either due to the pandemic or something that came up in the feasibility study spooked somebody at your organization. You need to go back and talk to those donors again, because they're probably wondering what the heck has been happening in the last 2 years. What happened to the project? So yes, maybe that's not what you wanted to hear, but yeah, if it's 2 years old, I would say a good feasibility study has a life of, 12 months or something. 2 years is too long. Okay. Oh, you had a leadership change at the top. Yeah. So yes. So you know what, Drew? A feasibility study is a great opportunity to introduce your new leaders to the biggest potential donors and have them talk through why they're excited about the project and get feedback directly from the donors. Now, that may be a little confusing. There's actually 2 ways to do a feasibility study, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But the general gist is, one way is to send a consultant out to talk to your biggest potential donors. Another way is to have a consultant coach you, the leaders of the organization, through having those critical conversations with your donors. That's what we do at Capital Campaign Pro, is we coach nonprofit leaders to have those critical conversations with donors. We teach them what questions to ask, the arc of the conversation. We role play with them. We teach them and provide them with tools to collect and analyze the data. We help them analyze the data, and we co-present recommendations to the board. So Drew said they had a leadership change. So a feasibility study where the leadership goes out and does the interviews is a perfect opportunity for the donors to get to know and feel comfortable with that new leader and ask questions and provide feedback. So I would say yes, awesome opportunity to re-engage those donors and introduce, and really, whether you're introducing a new leader or solidifying a relationship or growing a relationship with your current leaders, great opportunity during a feasibility study. All right. Let me go on to feasibility study benefits, and then we will go to Nancy's question in the Q&A box. So you probably have some board members who are questioning the importance of doing a feasibility study. And the most frequent thing I hear is, well, we know we're going to do the project, so we can just skip the feasibility study because we don't really want it to know what it says. I don't know. To me, it's like, going into the biggest fundraising event your organization has ever tried to do without a roadmap, without any information, without your GPS. Your feasibility study results and recommendations is the plan for your campaign, or it instructs the plan for your campaign. So saying you're going to skip this critical phase, this critical step, is totally naive, and it's just saying we're going to go in blind and see how much we can raise on a hope and a whim. What happens is that organizations call us and, they have a $10 million goal and they said, oh, we've raised $6 million. It was pretty easy. And now we're stuck. Yeah, I get it. You didn't do any planning from the beginning. You skipped the feasibility study. You thought you knew what you were doing, and now you're stuck, and it makes total sense. So do not let your board members talk you into skipping the feasibility study. It is penny wise and pound foolish, because the feasibility study should cost, less than 1%. I don't know, just a teeny tiny fraction of your campaign goal. Yes. Does it cost money? It does. It costs it costs money, but the information that you get and the relationships that you build prior to the campaign are invaluable, and they come back in spades. So let's look at some benefits. So doing a feasibility study requires you to have a clear project plan, because that's the plan you're going to test or put in front of your biggest potential donors. And they're going to potentially poke holes in it, which is fine. You want them to. You want to have a stronger case when you go back to ask them for the gift. But also, it requires you to really think through your plan in advance, because you don't want to give donors something that's vague. You don't want to go to them and say, yeah, we'd like to create, a school, but we're not really sure of the size or where it's going to be or how much it'll cost. Will you support us? No, you don't have any details. So doing a feasibility study requires you to create a clear plan. It also requires you to engage prospective donors. So these are the 50 prospects that have the potential to give you the top 20 gifts to your campaign, plus a few others from the community here and there who need to have a voice for various reasons. But really, this is an engagement tool for your biggest prospective donors prior to the campaign. You're inviting them in, you're engaging them early. It forces you to focus on the top donors. You have to figure out who are those top 50 prospects that have the potential to give us those top 20 or 30 gifts that we need to get to our goal. And we really can't do it without them. So we have to narrow it down early. It clarifies strengths and weaknesses. Hey, if we have weaknesses at our organization, we want to know about them before we head into a campaign, not mid-campaign. So that's okay. It gives the board confidence. Like I said, hold on one second, I'm going to cough. Okay, I muted myself. A feasibility study, actually, even the board members that are resistant at the beginning, it gives the board confidence, because you have 20 to 30 of your biggest potential donors who have given you more or less the thumbs up to say, proceed with the campaign. We think it's a great idea. We're excited. We're on board. I mean, that's what a feasibility study does. So a board that's hesitant about going into a campaign, or, not sure if you should, talk to your biggest potential donors and you'll have a lot more confidence. And it provides, of course, outside perspective. You're getting 20 or 30 community members to say, here's what we think. Here's the perspective from the community, and you're going to learn a ton. So what's the moral of the story? Do not let your board members talk you out of a feasibility study. And if you're an executive director, do not skip it. Okay, so Leslie, Nancy, I said we're going to get to your question, but I don't think it's about a feasibility study. I'm going to come back to it in 1 second. Leslie is asking, who does the feasibility study? A consultant, staff, or trustees? Okay, there's 2 different ways to do a feasibility study, Leslie. One is where a consultant, you hire an experienced campaign consultant who develops the plan, probably develops the materials, goes out and talks to your biggest, best potential donors anonymously and confidentially. They aggregate the reports and they make a bunch of recommendations to the board. That's one model. I believe in a different model. I think that there are too many holes in that model and that it is a huge missed opportunity for nonprofit leaders to get in front of their donors. Now, I am not recommending that you wing it or just make it up as you go. I recommend hiring an expert campaign consultant who has a ton of experience with this model of teaching and training nonprofit leaders to go out and interview their own donors. At Capital Campaign Pro, we role play with you, we debrief with you after the meetings, we give you the questions to ask, we teach you about the arc of the conversation, we help you prepare the right materials, and we aggregate and come up with the recommendations collaboratively so that it's not the staff doing it on their own, they're doing the interviewing. So okay, yes, usually it's the executive director or CEO, the development director, and maybe one board member who are doing the interviews, and it can change from organization to organization. All right, Nancy, your question is, can you talk about scaling back a goal when the board is committed to the original scope of the project at the original cost? So, I mean, you have to deal with reality, right? If the data, and you need data, you can't just be guessing at what you can raise. That's another reason to do a feasibility study. It gives you data about what you can realistically raise. If you're in a totally different ballpark than what your project costs, you have a couple of choices. One is to do some financing. So you can go to the bank and talk about a mortgage and see what works for your organization. If your organization has reserves, sometimes that's an option for organizations, sometimes it's not. And then, the project has to come in somewhere in the ballpark of what you can raise or what you can finance, et cetera. Just the board pretending that that's not the case probably doesn't do you any good. I would say, what I would say, if you have a board that's not listening, don't talk to them as a group, talk to them one-on-one. That's almost always the answer. Talk to your 3 or 4 most influential board members, give them a chance to ask you lots of questions, figure out how they feel about the situation, and ask them to get up at the next board meeting and talk about why something's happening, or to support you or back you up or stand up to a naysayer or whatever it is. Okay, great questions. Thank you. Let's talk about some frequently asked questions. We've already covered some of them, of course, in the first half of the presentation, but let's really dive into some of the most frequently asked questions that we get as campaign consultants. So, number one, how long will a campaign take? And I think that you should be trying to raise the most amount of money that you can in a 24 to 36 month period. If it's dragging out to 5, 6, 7, 8 years, with the exception of universities that do billion-dollar campaigns, I'm guessing, the majority of folks on this call are from social service agencies or schools or healthcare organizations or performing arts centers, but community-based organizations for the most part, and you're not doing billion-dollar campaigns that might take 5 to 7 to 10 years. But your campaign should take 24 to 36 months. Otherwise you're going to be burning out your staff, burning out your volunteers, burning out your donors. And what you want to do is have a project that you can raise the money for successfully in about 3 years. Sometimes it stretches to 4 years, but this is the goal. So how much will the campaign cost, right? That is a great question. We hear it a lot. So our rule of thumb is that you want to budget 10% of your campaign goal. So what do I mean by that? If you are trying, your campaign goal is $10 million, your campaign budget will be $1 million to start with. And you want to allocate that over 3 years, over the duration of your campaign. So what is that going to pay for? So let's say you're doing a $10 million campaign. You have a campaign budget of $1 million. So you actually have to raise 11 million for your campaign, because you have to raise the money that's going to cost to pay for the campaign. And then you allocate 300,000 plus over 3 years, each year for 3 years. And what is that going to pay for? That's going to pay for additional staff, which we'll get to in a minute. Yes. If you're raising an additional $10 million more than you normally raise, you are going to need more staff and resources. So yes, hiring another staff member, hiring campaign expertise, counsel, support. It's going to pay for donor recognition, plaques, and the like. It's going to pay for donor events, ribbon cuttings, kickoff ceremonies, celebrations, those meet and greets. It's also going to pay for campaign materials. So videos or brochures or, slide decks or branding or whatever it is. So it's also going to pay for other fundraising capacity. You might need to upgrade services or databases or whatever it might be. Wealth screening, of course. So that's how much the campaign is going to cost. Rule of thumb, start with 10%. Now, if you're doing a small campaign, and I know it's all relative, what's big and what's small, but in the campaign world, $1 million campaign, $1 million to $3 million campaigns are small. And unfortunately, there's some flat costs. And so you might need to budget 15%, a little bit higher. And then as you get higher, 10 million and up, you might only spend 8% or maybe as low as 6%. Really, whether it's 6% or 15%, starting with a budget of about 10% and, working up and down from there, campaigns are the most cost-effective type of fundraising there is. So if board members are squawking or concerned, tell them to look at how much it costs you to run your gala, to submit grant applications, to do direct mail. All of those are going to be significantly more expensive than 10% ROI. Okay. Somebody is asking in the question box, is 10% considered best practice? That seems really high to me. My understanding that the total should be below 7% to be considered best practice, and it cannot be charged on. Okay. And it cannot be charged on a percentage basis by the consultant. That is just what it turns out to be. Okay, so there's a couple of questions in here. One is consultants cannot charge a percentage of dollars raised. It is considered unethical. Consultants charge flat fees. If you come across a campaign consultant that wants, whatever percent of what you raise, run. It's very common knowledge that in fundraising sectors, you do not charge a percentage of dollars raised, you just charge a flat fee. So that's one question. So 10% is best practice. And I'm wondering well, let me just restate, the 10% covers all your fundraising costs, new staff hires, campaign consultants, donor recognition, campaign celebrations, campaign materials. So I'm not suggesting that you are paying your consultant 10%. So I just want to clarify that. The consultant will be in that 10%, but that's not the consultant fee. Okay, good. Thank you for letting me know that that was your question and I clarified it. All right, so board members want to know, do we need to hire additional staff? You already know my answer, right? The The campaign budget covers additional fundraising staff. Now, like I said, if you're at an organization, your campaign is only $1 million. So your campaign budget, let's assume we're starting with 10%, although I'm telling you it's going to need to be higher. Let's say 10%. So it's $100,000 over 3 years. So you have $33,000 a year to spend. That's not going to get you a new staff member, right? So, but it might get you some grant writing time. It might get you partial administrative help time. But that's why you're going to need to go up. If you have a tiny campaign, your percentage is going to be bigger. But that being said, my guess is if your campaign goal is $1 million, you're currently raising less than $100,000 a year, or, something like that. So you can't magically raise 10 times what you currently raise, twice as much, or 5 times or 10 times what you currently raise without additional staff and resources. So yes. Okay, let's talk about board roles in a campaign. What is expected of board members? Because that's really what they want to know, right? What do I have to do? What's expected of me? Okay, what role will the board play? So we're going to talk about individual board members and the full board. So here, the full board approves campaign objectives, the campaign goal, and the campaign plan. So before in the pre-campaign planning, your board is going to vote to have campaign objectives and an initial campaign goal, and probably to hire a consultant to do a feasibility study or help you do a feasibility study. And then they'll vote again after the feasibility study to approve officially launching the campaign with the campaign plan after the recommendations come in from the feasibility study. So that the whole board does together. That is the board's role. Now, of course, there's lots of roles for individual board members. So let's look at those. Okay, lots of roles. Serve on campaign committees. Of course, we want our board members to do that. Contribute to the campaign, right? Every board member needs to make a campaign gift and lead by example. They need to help hopefully identify prospective donors, or at least make connections between people who already are involved in the organization, already give, that they may know, and help identify other potential donors in the community who the organization may not be aware of yet. Help cultivate prospective donors. So whatever that means, invite them to coffee with the executive director, bring them on tours, sit down and talk to them, get them engaged, get them to volunteer. And of course, we want some board members soliciting gifts. Not every board member needs to solicit gift. Not every board member needs to do every one of these things, but they do need to vote to approve the board, the campaign, and they need to really be behind it, both financially and sort of commitment wise, right? If they don't want the campaign to happen, maybe this board is not the right place for them at this time. It's an opportunity to move them off. All right, last thing we're going to talk about today, and then I'll save a few minutes for more questions. Happy to do that, is how to set a board goal. And this is a question that we get frequently. I could have stuck it in board member FAQs, probably everything in board member FAQs, but how to set a board goal. So, okay. The reality is that there's no one size fits all amount. Everybody's always looking for, should the board give 50%? Well, some boards can and some boards can't. And so there's no hard and fast rule, but most boards, if we had to generalize, probably give somewhere in the realm of 20 to 50% of the campaign goal. Now, if you don't have a wealthy networked board, it's going to be on the lower end. If you have a board that you recruit for fundraising purposes specifically, they might give 50%, but really there is no one size fits all, and there's no rule, right? If your board can't give 50%, it doesn't mean that you can't do a campaign, for sure. Okay. The key is to involve your board members in setting the board giving goal. So there's lots of activities and exercises that you can do to encourage board members, the board as a whole, to come up with a goal. One exercise that I especially like is you need to show your board members your gift range chart. And this is in the context of campaign training, right? So every board needs some campaign training, sort of almost like the one I'm giving, prior to a campaign, right? So that they feel comfortable and confident that they know what's coming. So one of the exercises that I might do during a board training, once you have a gift range chart, so it might be a little further into the campaign, you have a gift range chart and you hand it out and you say, look, we need 20 gifts at 100,000 and above in order to get to our campaign goal. So I just want to sort of set the stage and the context for some of the gifts that we'll be looking for. And I want to pass out a note card. Don't put your name on it. I want you to write a dollar range or a dollar amount that you think you might be able to give for the campaign, right? And tell them, think about assets, don't think about checkbook giving, think about stock, retirement funds, property, assets, those types of things, because we're digging deep for this one special, exciting project. And everybody write down a number and hand it in and let somebody total them up and say, okay, the board handed in cards that total, $300,000. That doesn't get us to 10% of our goal. Let's see if we can do this one more time and sort of really stretch and, have a conversation about what it means for the board to step up and play a leadership role. All right. Okay. So we get this question, right? Must every board member give a gift? And I know that this is really controversial right now, probably has been for a long time. But my thought process is that, full board participation sends a strong and positive signal about the campaign. Are there exceptions to every rule? Or, can you count various things or participation for one or another board member when appropriate and necessary? Sure. But my philosophy is and has been that board members, they need to understand that we're asking community members to give significant, meaningful gifts, and that we need board members who want to volunteer and contribute expertise and contribute finances. And that's the only way a campaign is going to work. And so we do want every board member to give. So, of course, every board member should be encouraged to give as generously as possible. And campaign gifts should be over and above regular annual gifts. Okay. So that is going to be a different number for every single person on your board. And whatever they decide to do ultimately is going to be appreciated. And that has to be the attitude on your board and among your board members and among your staff. And, we do want board members to seriously consider making this their top charity for the duration of the campaign. And whether that's, $100 or $5,000 or $50,000 or $5 million or more, that is what it is. But everybody needs to give what they can and encouraged to do so. All right. So I just want to quickly highlight, we went over Campaign 101, timeline and phases. We talked about where the money would come from and the importance of feasibility studies. A few board member FAQs, board roles, and how to set a board goal. So I hope this was a good primer in what your board members are curious about and concerned about, confused about. and that you'll be able to share some of this information with them. I have a few more questions, so I'm going to take the slides down in a second and answer them. So stick around for answers to questions that are coming in. But if you want more from me or our board members guide to capital campaign fundraising, you can get it at capitalcampaignpro.com/board-members-guide. Okay, so you can download more information and all sorts of other free resources. Let's do some questions in our last remaining few minutes. So Michelle says, advice for a non-giving board. My board is a group of Catholic nuns who've taken a vow of poverty. They won't be giving to the campaign. So listen, Michelle, you are either going to have to make some sort of other campaign committee of people that can. This might be a good opportunity to diversify your board. But obviously nuns who have taken a vow of poverty do not meet our donor criteria, our ABC. They don't have the financial ability to give, right? So you're going to have to go outside your board and either expand your board or create another, a fundraising board, a campaign committee for your campaign. Nancy wants to know, how do you articulate the case for supporting the campaign without having a negative impact on the annual giving program? Great question, Nancy. That is a great question, and we never want a capital campaign to cannibalize or eat into our annual fund program. And so every time you ask for a campaign gift, and during your campaign, every time you ask for an annual gift, you are going to either double ask or double mention, right? For a long time, you're going to talk to donors about both. So certainly in the early days of the campaign, when you're soliciting individual major gifts and leadership level gifts, you're going to say to donors, listen, you've been a generous supporter at this level. Our programs and services are ongoing, and we need your continued support. Anything you decide to give to the campaign should be over and above what you give to our annual programs, which will continue to run while we do this campaign. And so, if you give $5,000 a year and we're asking you for $50,000 a year now, the first 5 we will apply to the annual fund. And, your gift will count as $45,000 a year to the campaign for the 3 years or whatever it is. So good question. And when you're, writing to donors, say, as you know, we're writing to ask you for the annual fund, which you've supported. And in a few months, stay tuned. We have some exciting news coming about an exciting project. So you can give them a heads up about that. Always talk about both campaigns. Sorry, excuse me. Charlie wants to know, does the 10% include the investment in the feasibility study? Absolutely, it does. All fundraising costs. Now, like I said, smaller campaigns, bigger percentage. But yes, your fundraising budget for the campaign, absolutely. All right. Sarah wants to know, is there a link for the downloadable guide? So let me try and pick that up. Oops, hold on. 1 second so I can stick it in the chat, and then I'll continue to answer questions. Okay, Sarah, here it comes, except for Jay. I can't seem to post comment to anybody but us.
Oh, I'm sorry about that, Amy. Well, I'll tell you what, then
I'll send it to you guys and you guys can share it then.
We'll make
okay,
sure.
perfect.
In fact, there's Capital Campaign Pro. There's the board members guide right there. So got it. It just, I'll make sure it is shared with the group.
Great. So okay. Much. So Kara, do we have time for 1 or 2 more, or do you want to?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Kara's asking, could you share the importance of communications and PR for a capital campaign public launch? So yeah, I mean, you want to have a communications and press plan for the public launch of your campaign. That's the idea, is to share it with the community. And you definitely want to have a plan for that. And, you're going to be raising the last 20, 30% of your campaign goal, and you want it spread far and wide. Okay, let's do one more. And Richard is asking, you might want to touch on the ability in campaign mode to create committees with outsiders and other community leaders, not just board members. Oh, thank you, Richard. I appreciate that. So yes, it's an excellent point. Every campaign and every organization is going to have a campaign committee in addition to board members who help with the campaign and the fundraising and contributing. So absolutely. I will tell you that a lot of organizations make the mistake of thinking that the first thing they need to do is to recruit a huge campaign committee and just pile people in and pack people on. And then they don't have anything to do with them. They're just a list of names, and the people don't have a great experience. So we take the approach of having more ad hoc subcommittees, fluid committees for each phase of the campaign. So in pre-campaign planning, you may recruit 5 people, and then for feasibility study, you can thank them and release them. They've been on the campaign committee, and then recruit another 5 or 10 people to help with the feasibility study. And then in the quiet phase, you might bring the great volunteers onto that committee too, but then recruit even more volunteers. So the campaign committees ebb and flow with the phases. And that way, if you have somebody who loves planning events but hates asking for gifts, they don't need to be on your quiet phase committee. They can be on your kickoff committee. And so you can use volunteers where their talents are, where their interests are, and have lots of people engaged in your campaign in addition to your board members. So thank you, Richard. I appreciate that. Jay, let me turn it back over to you.
Well, actually, I want to pick up on a question that Wendy had, which is about your slides, which were so wonderful, Amy. So how would you like those shared? Would you like people to reach out to you? Would you like DonorSearch to share them? It's entirely up to you.
I would love for DonorSearch to share them. So I will happily get you those. That would be great.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And before anybody goes, I want you to know that in a minute, when Amy and I both leave the screen, you'll see a way that you'll have some notes about how this information will be coming to you, a recording of this session, the slides as we just discussed, but also how you can sign up for additional sessions and see sessions from the past, including several that Amy has been kind enough to provide. And she's also been in the podcast series. So if you have not had enough of Amy Eisenstein, and I hope the answer is no, then you'll be able to get a little bit more of her training and expertise and a little bit of her own personal story in the series. And you'll find all that over at DonorSearch.net. So appreciative of everything you said here today. And I have to say that I have to borrow from that the one thing that you've been doing with passing the cards, anonymous pledge cards, and then doing a second round. I thought that was brilliant. All of this is so great. Thank you so much. Really do appreciate you and your willingness to share today.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks for joining me.
Yes, thank you everybody for being here. And once again, you're going to see a little QR code at the end if you want to learn more about the sponsor of this series, but you also find out more about the details on things to come. And if you are noting things in your calendar right now, I'll let you know that this Thursday, we have a session called New Frameworks for Evaluating Advanced Tech and Nonprofits. It's kind of our second look at ChatGPT. It'd be really interesting to discuss that with you. But anyway, it's a deeper dive into the pros and cons of ChatGPT, and that's with a whole panel of people. Kenna Barrett, Nathan Chappelle, Mina Das, Tim Sarantonio. That should be a lot of fun. That's on Thursday at 2. And then we have 2 things coming up next week with Ryan Gennard, author of Future Philanthropy, on recruiting and coaching your running fundraising team, and Peter Heller of Heller Fundraising on kind of a complementary session to today's Your Capital Campaign, Can You Launch Now? So take this set of guidelines, apply it to what Peter says, and I'm sure you'll have a better recipe for success. We also have an episode of the podcast, which you'll enjoy with Tony Meyer. So I hope you'll listen to that if you enjoy podcasts. And so with all that, we just want to thank you for being here. We'll look forward to seeing you hopefully on Thursday. So till next time, take care and stay tuned for the QR code. Thank you, Amy.